Alright, so hey there guys. So this video is going to be a continuation of my previous Eula math video. This video is going to be about Eula and her teams, and I tried my best to incorporate as much math as I could. So this would be a lot more of an objective video. So here I'm using her 1 cycle damage for simplicity. And for this Eula teams video, I'm mainly focusing on maximizing Eula's damage. So the teams that I suggest here are teams that have Eula as the main damage dealer, and we're going to try to maximize her damage as much as possible, and math is going to tell us exactly how we can maximize her. Here are some potential teammate options. This is what I guessed would work before I actually did the math. And the first thing that comes to mind is Superconduct. Superconduct is very important. It reduces physical resistance by 40% for 12 seconds. Which is absolutely humongous, and we're definitely going to have to use Superconduct right out of the gates. Our potential teammate options are Fischl, Beidou, Lisa, and Razor. Fischl and Beidou are very obvious. Lisa is not as obvious, but I think Lisa could actually be a very good support here. Because if we look at Lisa, one thing that sets her apart, Fischl and Beidou do much more damage than Lisa. But Lisa has this passive here, where if you use her ult, the enemy's defense will be decreased by 15%. Defense may not seem like much, but in Genshin Impact, defense is actually a very, very big factor. And I'll get into the math later of that as well. These 4 options are your options for Superconduct. There's Fischl, Beidou, Lisa, and Razor C4. Now, Razor C4. Razor is also an electro character, so he can do Superconduct. But in his C4, he also has this, where if he uses the E, it will decrease the enemy's defense by 15%, just like Lisa. So that's also very interesting to actually think about as well. So this is what we're thinking so far: Fischl, Beidou, Lisa, or Razor C4 for Superconduct. There's also Xinyan. Xinyan, I think, is going to be very important because of Xinyan's second passive. As long as you put up her shield with her E, you get 15% increased physical damage. She's the only character in the game, I believe, that actually gives physical damage from her passive, which makes her a pretty big factor for Eula, since an increased damage percent is very nice. And it's basically just free 15% all the time, since her E is very easy to actually... The cooldown is 18 seconds, but the shield is 12 seconds. The shield doesn't survive that often, but usually you can kind of dodge a couple of times, and then your shield should be able to last at least 6 seconds or so. So you have a pretty good uptime of this passive. And also Xinyan is a pyro character, which is great because that contributes to pyro resonance. And then after that, the 4th slot, you can kind of just use whoever you want, to be honest. Some candidate picks that I picked here for the time being is Bennett, Zhongli, and Mona. I don't have Mona on this account, but Mona is very good. Bennett, of course, we all know. Zhongli, we all know. You could also bring anyone else, like maybe Xiangling, to complete that pyro resonance, and Xiangling herself is also pretty good. You could also bring another cryo character, possibly, if you want 2 cryos on the team, because 2 cryos won't hurt. Because Eula's ult is pretty expensive at 80 energy cost, so having an extra cryo actually helps her quite a bit when it comes to energy. So, yep, those are the potential teammate options. And now, let's get into the messy math. Messy math on Cheat 2. It's a bit messy, but basically this is what I did. So I did Eula with the new Claymore, Song of Broken Spines, with 40% total attack substat on artifacts. Now, usually you'd have like 30% to 40% attack substat, and also you have some extra flat attack substats as well, so I think this is a fair estimate. 200% crit damage also is pretty easy, since Eula, just like Ganyu and Hu Tao, Eula also has crit damage ascension when she levels up. She gets around 38%, if I remember correctly, it's 38.4% crit damage from being level 90, and I'm using 4-set Pale Flame artifact set, which is the new set in Genshin Impact. The one that's... And I'm assuming this set here, I'm assuming 4 set of this set. Now, you don't actually really need the 4 set of this. You can work just fine with 2 set Pale Flame and 2 set Bloodstained because they essentially just kind of do the same thing. But Pale Flame is slightly better. Anyways, let's get on to the math. So now what I wanted to do with the math is I wanted to see just how important each thing is to increase Eula's damage. So here I calculated everything individually. I calculated how much Superconduct helped, I calculated how much Pyro Resonance helps, I calculated how much Xinyan helped, Zhongli's Shield, Bennett, Lisa, blah blah blah. That's why all this math here was done. Now as you can see here, I wrote that Superconduct increases Eula's damage by 17.44%, which I found out from this. Because without Superconduct, she does 427,685, which if you notice is my baseline for basically everything. With Superconduct, she goes up from 427,000 to 502,000. An 80k difference. That's really, really big. Now also with Superconduct, you have to keep in mind that you're not actually getting the full 40% resistance decrease from Superconduct. Because Eula has this neat little thing where she already decreases the enemy's resistance. And most enemies' resistance is 10%, and Eula will drop their resistance to under 0%. And now what happens under 0% resistance is that every single resistance debuff after that is halved. So that's why Superconduct, instead of being minus 40% resistance, it will most of the time be 20% resistance. That's why the damage increase is somewhere closer to 17.44%, because minus 20% resistance kinda translates to something like that. Also, the Superconduct does not affect her E, by the way. Because her E is Cryo, and her Burst, it has 3 instances of damage. It has the first Burst, which does cryo damage, which is not affected by the Superconduct, but the big part of her ult, her Lightfall Sword, both are affected by Superconduct. So that's why Superconduct is so important for her. Because if you see here, Superconduct is the biggest multiplier to Eula, and no one's even really close except Bennett, but Bennett is Bennett. So yep. So with this math, we confirm that Superconduct is the most important thing when it comes to maximizing her damage. So an Electro character is very necessary. Next, Pyro Resonance. So my thought process was like this. Since we know that an Electro character is necessary because we need to do Superconduct, that leaves 2 other slots open. So what if we slot in 2 Pyro characters? If we slot in 2 Pyro characters, this is what Pyro Resonance does. It increases attack by 25%, which is pretty good, and it's really good, especially since Eula's base attack is 342. It's extremely high. And we're also using Song of Broken Pines, which has an extremely high base attack as well. So Pyro Resonance here actually increases the damage by quite a lot, from 427,685 to 467,382, which translates to an extra 9.28% damage for Eula. So Pyro Resonance is actually very good. If you don't have the new Claymore, the number is actually closer to 8% if you don't have a Song of Broken Pines, but you have another 5-star Claymore. Because how good Pyro Resonance is will depend greatly on your weapon. Because Pyro Resonance only increases the attack of the character and the weapon. It does not increase the attack from any other source. So you need to make sure your weapon's really, really strong for the Pyro Resonance to really go into effect. With Song of Broken Pines, it goes to 9.28%. With any other Claymore, it's around 8%. And if you're using 4-star Claymores, it's around 6 to 7%. Which still is pretty good. It's still pretty high thanks to Eula's pretty nuts base attack. She does have the second highest base attack in the game, by the way. Pyro Resonance, obviously we're gonna put Xinyan as one of our options because if you look at Pyro Resonance for Eula, we really just have 2 candidate options here, Bennett and Xinyan. And why is Xinyan such a good Pyro option is because she buffs physical damage. Now her physical damage buff, Xinyan's physical damage buff is about this much. It went from 427,685 to 452,116, which means that Xinyan increases your Eula's damage by 5.71% just for being there. And also she's contributing to Pyro Resonance as well. So actually, you could combine these two together, and Xinyan could possibly give you 14.99% extra damage, assuming you're using another Pyro character. But if you're using just Xinyan, she increases Eula's damage by 5.71%, which is always nice, because extra sources of damage don't really exist, especially when it comes to like characters. So Xinyan having this buff is really nice because you can put her in for some extra damage. Although I believe, yes, Xinyan's buff to Eula is the lowest. However, if you want to run Pyro Resonance, you are going to run Xinyan anyway, because she buffs Eula more than any other Pyro character aside from Bennett. So you're gonna get this extra 5.71% if you're running Pyro Resonance. So in actuality, Xinyan's giving somewhere around 14.99%. And also for those of you who are wondering why 15% physical damage turns out to only be 5.71%, it's because resistance in this game is quite something. Because physical damage multiplies your damage, but your damage has to go through the enemy's resistance as well. So the 15% doesn't really carry through all the time, and that's why Super Conduct is also so good. And that's why Super Conduct and Zhongli's Shield, which I'll get into right after this, is so good. Even though their abilities halved, because the enemy will be below 0% resistance all the time with Eula. Resistance is the final thing, that is the final multiplier that doesn't have to go through anything. So it barely gets actually lowered, aside from getting halved. And other stuff gets lowered much more. So in case anyone was wondering why 15% suddenly turns into 5.71, that's the reason. And now Zhongli's Shield. Zhongli's Shield is really good. Well, because Zhongli's Shield decreases resistance of enemies by 20%. Although with Eula already having resistance, Zhongli's Shield ends up having the same problem as Super Conduct, where you're never going to get that 20%, and you just get 10%. And you just get a 10% buff, which does make my calculations a bit easier, because 10% resistance to everything basically just means he gives Eula extra 10% damage. 427,000 to 427,685 to 470,454. So yep, Zhongli's Shield is also really good. Zhongli's just really good in general. And Zhongli's Shield gives 10%, which is really good because that's higher than Pyro Resonance and Xinyan. And also Zhongli's Shield gives you a ton of survivability as well, which allows your Eula to survive much better and get in a lot more hits pretty easily. Which is also pretty huge considering Eula's ult. You want to hit the enemy many times to get as many stacks as possible. Now Bennett of course is really nuts when it comes to increasing damage. He's just absolutely crazy. So here I used a more average Bennett, where Bennett has 600 base attack and a level 6 ult. With a level 6 ult and 600 attack talent. So yep, with Bennett 600 attack and level 6 talent, because that's a bit more average for Bennett. That's like, I would say that's currently close to the average player's Bennett. You can increase Eula's damage from 427,685 to 496,601, which is a 16.11% increase, which is almost the same as Super Conduct. It's one lower, but the thing is Bennett can go much higher because this is only 600 attack with talent level 6. You can easily get Bennett's talents up to level 8, and if you have Bennett at C5, when you level him up to level 8, he'll be level 11 for his ult. And things just go really crazy, but it's Bennett, so obviously we already knew that he was gonna be one of the best damage supports, because of course he is. And now here are some interesting things as well, as I also calculated Lisa, because you need to use Super Conduct anyway, right? And while Fischl and Beidou are excellent choices because Fischl and Beidou do a lot of damage, Lisa herself doesn't do damage because Lisa herself doesn't really do much damage. However, she has minus 15% defense on ult, And for Lisa, it's very easy because as long as your ult hits once, their defense is decreased by 15%, and the ult lasts 15 seconds. So there is a lot of opportunities to hit. So it's basically guaranteed. And with Lisa, minus 15% defense on ult, just from the defense debuff alone, it goes from 427,685 damage to 462,362, which is an 8.11% increase. And also, since if you're using Lisa, you're going to use her as your electro character. She's also going to be the one doing super conduct, which allows you to get this other 17.44%. So we add them together. Lisa actually ends up buffing you by 25.55%. Lisa buffs up your Eula by 25.55% damage for the cost of slightly less damage because Fischl's Oz and Beidou's ult is really strong. But if you want to maximize Eula, then Lisa is a better choice. Because aside from resistance, defense is actually one of the biggest factors in terms of damage. Because some of you may know this and some of you may not, but with how defense works in the game right now, if you don't have any sort of defense debuff, you're only doing half of your damage at most of the time, just due to how the defense formula works. And now Razor C4. After thinking about Razor C4, the Razor C4 would be the same as Lisa's. It would also do 8.11%. But the problem is, Razor C4 only lasts for 7 seconds, which is not enough time for Eula to get all her stacks on her ult, because I believe she needs at least 8 seconds based on footage that we saw. Because the sword does last for quite a while. So Razor C4 doesn't actually really work at all, which is a shame because I managed to get Razor C4 and I basically never use him on my main, and he's still gonna be neglected on my main. But yeah, that's how it is. And also, just to show you how strong defense debuff is, I did this for fun as well, where if you want to use Klee C2, if you have her, where Klee C2, if you use Klee's E, it decreases the enemy's defense by 23%. Lisa does 15%, Klee does 23%. And these are the calculations for Klee. It went from 427,685 to 483,260, which translates to a 12.99% damage increase, which is, again, really huge. 12.99% damage, but that requires Klee C2, so the majority of players are not going to have that. Alright, so now that we've discussed all the potential best candidates for Eula's team, I organized every single team in like this. Klee C2 is at the bottom because most people don't have Klee C2. Even though if you have Klee C2, you get the theoretical strongest build, but Klee C2 is expensive. So aside from Klee C2, these percentage numbers are the amount of extra damage that your Eula can do. So, like, for example, this is the best team for Eula here, if we're not counting Klee C2, of course, which is Eula, Lisa, Bennett, and Xinyan. Eula will do an extra 56.65% damage. So that's what the percentage means. The second best team for Eula is Eula, Lisa, Zhongli, Bennett, which gives Eula 51.66% extra damage. Then the third best team is Eula, Beidou / Fischl, Bennett, and then Xinyan, which is 48.54%. And then Eula with Beidou, Fischl. Also, by the way, before I get a bit further, Lisa's ult cost is also 80, but since Lisa's not there to do damage anyway, you just put her in with like an insane amount of energy recharge. You put her with an energy recharge artifact, which is 51.8%. And then as for weapons, you just put whatever has energy recharge on it. Like for example, Favonius Codex here. To just get as much recharge as possible, and 80 energy won't be that much of a problem. Especially since you already are running another character that's 80 energy anyway. So by the time you actually get Eula's ult, then Lisa's ult will be ready before because she will have much higher energy recharge. Eula, Beidou, Fischl, Bennett, Xinyan is 48.54%. Eula, Beidou slash Fischl, Bennett, and Xinyan combo gives Eula extra 48.54% damage. Eula with Beidou Fischl, Zhongli, Bennett as a combo gives 43.55%. By the way, I put Beidou slash Fischl here because they basically do the same thing. They're both electros for superconduct. So that's why I put them like that. And then the fifth here is Eula, Lisa, Zhongli, Xinyan at 41.26%. And then here I tried to not use superconduct. Eula, Zhongli, Bennett, Xinyan. And it's 41.1%, which is basically second to last. The last is Eula, Beidou Fischl, Zhongli, Xinyan. Even though it has superconduct, it's lower than this team because Bennett plays a big part, and without Pyro Resonance, Xinyan doesn't really do that well. If there's Pyro Resonance, then Xinyan does amazingly. So yep. It's also kind of funny to see how the four-star team is actually the highest for free-to-plays, which is great. And now let's move on to this, which if you have Klee C2, it's a bit fun. Because if you use Eula, Lisa, Bennett, and Klee, whereas you're basically replacing Xinyan with Klee, you get 63.93% extra damage on your Eula, which is nuts. 63% compared to 56 is pretty crazy. Eula, Beidou slash Fischl, Bennett, and then Klee C2 will give you 55.82% extra damage on your Eula. Eula, Lisa, Xinyan, Klee C2 gives you 53.53. Eula, Zhongli, Lisa, and Klee C2 gives 48.54. Eula, Zhongli, Bennett, and Klee gives 48.38%. This is a team that does not have superconduct, if you noticed. The ones without superconducts are pretty low. And this one, Eula, Beidou, Fischl, Xinyan, Klee C2 is 45.42%, the last. So this is how I'm gonna do the math for team composition, and as you can see here, if you want an affordable team that's the best for your Eula, then this is your choice right here. And yep, that's basically it for the math. So TLDR. In terms of boosting Eula's damage, Superconduct takes priority, and then it's Zhongli's Shield, and then Xinyan, and then Pyro Resonance. It's higher than Xinyan if you have high enough attack, which is around 2k plus, which isn't that hard to get per se, but it is kind of hard if you don't have a 5-star Claymore. Here are 4 main points that I want to be summarized. Superconduct is basically a must-have. And now the second point here is interesting, because the second point, I would actually advise against using Zhongli on Eula's team if you can. Because Zhongli's 20% resistance, as you've noticed, it becomes halved to 10%. Since Eula already herself brings the enemies to 0, so Zhongli's resistance is half as effective. He still works amazingly with Eula, of course, but he'll work in other teams much better, especially if the other teams don't have any sort of resistance shred. And if you've noticed, another problem with Zhongli is that it's kind of hard to fit in. It's kind of hard to also fit into Pyro Resonance at the same time as well. Which is why this team right here, Eula, Lisa, Bennett, Xinyan, is actually better, because they can fit in more things. Because Zhongli kind of takes a space, and while Zhongli is still really good, like this team is still second place, he would work much better in another team. Like for example, your second team is Hu Tao, Ganyu, or Xiao. He works much better there, because then he gets 15% resistance instead of 10 most of the time, which really does make a difference at 5%. And now number 3, even though Xinyan does seem kind of low if you look on here, Xinyan is still the only character that actually gives physical damage, and she's also basically the next best choice, because after Xinyan, there's basically no one else. So the teams that I actually advise the most would be this team, of course. Eula, Lisa, Bennett, Xinyan. Also Eula, Beidou, Fischl, Bennett, Xinyan. Basically running Xinyan instead of Zhongli. Because Zhongli, while he's better, he would be much better on other teams. And basically there's no one else. So Xinyan is still really good. And yeah, number 4 is just Bennett is nuts. So he kind of makes these teams look a bit too inflated, but that's because he's Bennett. I hope you guys enjoyed this Eula team composition breakdown. Please point out any errors if you see them in the comments. I would love for people to identify if there are some errors, because while I am pretty decently confident with my math, because I managed to get an 800 on Math 2 SAT, I'm not 100% confident with my. I'm a human and I make mistakes pretty dang often, to be honest. So, yep. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.